Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We're in the company of Christopher Dickey of the Daily Beast, Christian Wernicke of German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, Cynthia Cardoso of sister station Radio France International, and France 24's very own Robert Parsons. Before the break, we were talking about the dilemma of how to take back, whether or not to take back those asylum seekers through this complicated process that was fleshed out at a summit between the EU and Turkey. But there's another dilemma that involves Turkey itself. Turkey, which coincidentally has been cracking down more and more on the press. Last week, it was the takeover of the country's largest circulation daily newspaper, Zaman. This week, the seizure of the Cihan news agency, also close to an Erdogan rival, the US-based cleric Fethullah Gulen. This Friday, at a rally in the southwestern city of Buhur, Erdogan blasting his own constitutional court for overturning the jailing of two editors at newspaper Cumhuriyet. The paper had posted photos and a video that purportedly showed intelligence officials transporting arms to Syria in trucks back in 2014.
Excuse me, but I do not recognize the decision of an institution that doesn't respect the rights and interests of the people of this country. I hope the constitutional courts won't try such things again, as it would threaten its legitimacy and its very existence.
Robert Parsons, this is the Turkey we're doing business with.
Yeah, I mean, not because we want to do business with this particular Turkey at the moment, because at the moment we have very little choice. Turkey is in a position, if it wants to just send refugees, migrants across the border to Turkey, to Greece, excuse me, causing enormous damage and enormous problems for the European Union. We have to do business with Turkey, whether we like it or not. Turkey at the moment is in a strong position. It won't always be in a strong position. It's got problems of its own, of course, with Russia. But at the moment, whether we like it or not, we have to do a deal with Turkey.
All right, disagreeing with you on Twitter is Pete. He says the EU should withdraw from talks while Turkey jails opponents, controls the media, and murders Kurds in Syria. Cynthia Cardoso.
Well, just as Rob said, is it European Union ready to swallow its pride in order to have a, it's a very complicated situation because, of course, it's a moral dilemma to deal with Turkey with that clearly disrespect to human rights and the freedom of press and so on. But on the other hand, geographically, Turkey is impossible not to deal with it. So European Union must to find a kind of, I don't know, a consensus or what kind of solution, but we cannot ignore Turkey. It's sad, but it's unfortunate, but it's true.
We were mentioning in part one of our discussion those regional elections in 3 states in Germany this coming Sunday. How much is this going to weigh on the vote?
Oh, certainly a lot. Chancellor Merkel would have loved to see the result with Turkey and with the European partners already before this election to regain some ground. You will see it's not like the Front National in France, but you will see in 3 regional parliaments for the first time a really fundamentally anti-European, anti-Euro, anti-immigration party coming into the parliament. It will be, and in one Eastern German region, you will probably have 18 to 20% of the vote in favor of this party called Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, and that is a change. It is not a shock anymore because we are seeing this party rising for like 6 months. And we will see the reflexes that the democratic parties will go around this. But in all three states that are voting on Sunday, the result and the next government is totally unpredictable.
And how will Merkel's CDU fare?
She will fare far less well than they had hoped like 6 months ago. And then the problem is, which CDU are you talking about? Because there's one part of the CDU that is opposing Merkel's policy, and nevertheless they may get votes. While, for example, in the biggest region, the most important region in the southwest, Baden-Württemberg, in the southwest of Germany, it is the green president of the region, who is the member of the Green Party, the first Green president of any region in Germany, in the history of Germany, who is supporting most strongly the Merkel course. So it's very difficult. It's not according to party line on the migrant issue whether you have supporters or opponents of Germany's policy at the moment. So it's a little mix up, and it will be really difficult to sort things out after Sunday.
All right, we're going to turn our attention to Britain, where there was a rare move by Buckingham Palace this week, a complaint filed with the National Press Regulator over the Sun's front-page report that claimed Queen Elizabeth II favors leaving the European Union in a June referendum. Queen spoke with venom and emotion, said the Page 2 headline on that story. The Rupert Murdoch-owned tabloid insists it'll defend the complaint vigorously, Robert Parsons.
Why do you look to me? The token Brit on the panel here. No, you know, it's one of those classic situations in the UK where the royal family gets dragged into politics. It's not meant to happen, but you know. Everybody gets a pretty good idea what the Queen thinks about one story. Just recently, we had the referendum on Scottish independence. Just before the referendum took place, the Queen made a statement which sort of made clear where she stood on things. In other words, in favour of the union being maintained. Whether or not it influenced the vote or not, I don't know. But certainly in this particular case,
but in that case, we can just assume that it was the Prime Minister's office that cleared whatever remarks she made.
Probably, yeah. This is a little bit different. This may be Rupert Murdoch using the Sun newspaper to create not just a difficulty for the Queen, but also a difficulty for David Cameron. He's got no love for the British royal family. He's probably trying to get a double whammy here, where he hits the monarchy and hits David Cameron at the same time.
Or, Christopher Dickey, this is Rupert Murdoch we're talking about. He's selling newspapers.
Yeah, and he's been getting married and stuff. So, you know, maybe...
He got married last week to Jerry Hall.
To Jerry Hall last week. You know, maybe he's just in a kind of a playful mood. You know, this is Rupert Murdoch at play. Let's see what the Queen would say about the Brexit. I don't know. I really don't know.
All right. There was also the source of the leak, and that also is turned into quite a sport over in Britain, with a lot of attention turning to Justice Secretary Michael Gove.
Good evening, Mr. Gove. Was it you who leaked the information about the Queen?
Very nice to see you.
All right. Exit, Mr. Gove. That's all we heard from him. Christian Wernicke, your thoughts? And these are early days before that June Brexit referendum.
Well, as anybody at the table, I don't know what the Queen thinks or said. What I, as an outside observer, can say, the way how the Murdoch press is handling these things is just unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable, and I think at least half of the British people know that Murdoch press is basically lying and inventing stories, and nevertheless they buy it.
And the quote, "I don't understand Europe," that supposedly she might have said during this meeting or whatsoever. So it's
a lunch.
At the lunch. So it's even making it more interesting. Like, she doesn't understand Europe. It's something that other Britons might be saying as well.
Long ago, incidentally,
exactly.
as well.
So it's something that also the population could relate to. They don't understand Europe. Neither does the Queen. So
the Queen. One final point on this: who has never granted an interview.
Yeah. She's not likely to do so now either. Certainly not to the Sun.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wednesday, they marched in the streets of Paris. Friday, those young students received in more orderly fashion at the Prime Minister's office. Manuel Valls emerging from the meeting with students who are worried about a labor reform bill that would make it easier to hire and fire and cap severance pay. There you see Valls, the Prime Minister, flanked by his Economy Minister, Emmanuel Macron, and the Labour Minister, whose the bill bears her name, Myriam El Khomri. He promised, quote, a dynamic compromise before the final draft is presented to the full cabinet. As for the students, well, earlier this week, they were skeptical.
When Hollande was elected, he made promises. He didn't do what he said he would do, and we're here to remind him of this so that he might end his tenure on a positive note.
It's incredibly hard for young people to find their place in the job market. It's a succession of internships and poorly paid jobs, and now we're being told that it will be easier for companies to lay off employees. So we're afraid for our working conditions in the future.
I have a project for the future. I want to build a life. I don't want to ask myself every week, am I going to keep my job? Am I going to be able to continue receiving my salary at the end of each month?
Christopher Dickey?
Oh, welcome to the 21st century, kids. I mean, what do they think? This is not a world in which you go to work for one company and you work for it all your lifetime and everything is secure and you're always taken care of. Maybe we wish it were that way. People thought it was that way when I was their age, but it didn't turn out that way. It's not that way for me. It's not that way for anybody else in the job market now. Certainly not in the United States, not in any dynamic economy. What's happening here in France, when these students march, when they talk about this kind of thing, they act as if they're living in the middle of the 20th century when the world was a very different place, when there was no internet, no iPhones, no mass communications, no competition of the kind that exists now. You have to reinvent yourself all the time now. That may be difficult, but if you are not creative, if you're not willing to do that, you're going to be screwed. And these kids are going to be screwed.
Cynthia Cardoso?
Well, this is the startups culture that enter in the world now. But I mean, the problem is, of course, it's such a cliche to say that it's very difficult to have reforms conducted in France. So the problem is wherever you have to attempt to have a reform, of course, you're going to have backlash. And the students, of course, they're concerned because it's true, the high rate of unemployment for young people.
Because we had a big debate about this week, and the jury is out over whether this reform to make the labor market, because France does have stringent rules, whether it's good or bad for those students who are marching.
Yeah, actually, I think no one has a clear answer about this. And the problem for the government that at this very moment, they have not real support from their own base, their own party. They don't have support from the unions. They try to make a kind of lonely rider to try to present this bill. But I think it's going to be very difficult to pass. And I think the students' unions, the movements, they're going to go on the streets again. And of course, it's going to be very tough to make this reform pass.
It's the student union which breeds a lot of the leadership of the ruling Socialist Party that was calling on the youth to march.
Yeah, but I mean, part of the problem, surely, isn't it, that it's the rigidity of the French labour laws that makes it almost impossible for companies to have a high turnover of staff, which in turn plays into few jobs for students.
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, George W. Bush once said, and was made fun of for saying it, there's no such word as entrepreneur in French.
Yeah.
But in a way, he was right.
Oh, come
because
on.
This is not an entrepreneurial society.
No.
This is not a place where people start up jobs, or if they want to, where they can do it easily. Every government comes in and says, we're going to make it easier for you to start businesses. And it doesn't happen. If you can't start businesses, you can't hire people.
Or someone who does agree with you, the French are not reformable. It's just a question of folks having lost confidence in their political class.
True, certainly. That's absolutely true. Yeah, that is part of the problem. If Hollande had done this reform at the beginning of his term, he would have had much more political credit to maybe push it through. I don't think that all the elements of this reform are really perfect or anything, but I mean the basic truth is that the French system at the moment does not work at all. I mean, you have 25% youth unemployment. You have 27% of young people who are employed with state subsidies. Something is rotten in this French labor market. So you can't. I understand fully the student who says, "I'm fed up going from one internship to the other, or from one CDD, from one temporary contract to the next one." But that is not the reason. Is not that this reform is threatening to make it even worse. No, this reform may open a way that you get at the end a permanent contract. That is the intention of it. I mean, this is one of the few times that I'm now covering here France, where I have to say the intention of this government with this reform is absolutely right. It's absolutely right.
Maybe the timing was not good.
The timing is horrible, and the communication is also horrible.
But the truth is also, we expected Sarkozy to do this years and years ago. He came in, he ran on this platform. That was the idea, is he was going to reform these labor laws.
Which it doesn't make easier for Hollande, because now his critics say not even the right did dare this reform, and now he, as a social democratic president, is doing it. But I think this reform is in the interest of the people who are opposing it.
All right, before we go, he's facing charges at both the state and federal level. Brazil's iconic former leader caught up in money laundering and kickback allegations linked to the widening Petrobras corruption scandal. The labor leader who'd fought dictatorship and had millions pulled out of poverty on his watch as president of Brazil, now tainted by scandal.
Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, misrepresentation and money laundering. The state prosecutor's office has reason to believe that the former president, Lula, and his family improperly benefited from the triplex apartment.
A lot of talk about that apartment there, Cynthia Cardoso.
Real estate.
And the story this Friday with the president, Dilma Rousseff, saying, I don't want to comment on speculation that Lula will now enter her government, thus making him unindictable by all except the Supreme Court. But she says he would make a great minister.
Well, this has been a crazy, crazy week in Brazil since from last Friday when he went to testimony. In a very spectacular way, it was a circus with the police. It seems like he was Bin Laden with all the police and the army around his building to bring him to, so it was really exaggeration. And over this week, he was really passionate about it. And this speculation about being a minister started 2 days ago, actually. They say that if he would become a minister, of course, in Brazil, according to the law, he only be judged by the Supreme Court, which could make all these investigations on corruption really, really take many, many months. He would be protected, as you say, if he become minister. But of course, if he would become minister, he would become president, because, with the power, the influence he has, Dilma would be only a decorative personality if he would really become minister, especially because they said he would be chief of staff. So if he become really a chief of the government, Dilma would have really little room to govern.
All right, a couple of surprising things this week. One of them is The Economist rushing to Lula's aid in one of their editorials, saying in forcibly detaining Lula rather than asking him to volunteer to be questioned last week, the judge, Mr. Moro, may also have gone too far.
Exactly. That's something that's been said during the whole week. Many specialists say that it was really an exaggeration to do this with Lula, because, of course, there is allegation, but so far there is no clear proof, clear evidence. And regarding the myth or the icon that Lula is, being arrested, being this position of victim, maybe enforce the power he has. He never... we know that he wants to be candidate in 2018 or maybe earlier if something goes bad with Dilma. But of course, the myth, it got even stronger with these allegations that have not been proved yet.
And so Brazil more polarized than ever?
More polarized than ever. We going to have a real demonstration this Sunday against the government. And 5 days after, we're going to have another huge protest pro-government. So this week, you're going to see this polarization and it became a really real war.
Cynthia, one final question on this, because some have said, this is, shows that the rot is terrible and it's been ignored for years, and they didn't do the right reforms when the price of oil and commodities was high and all this. Others saying, no, this shows the strength of modern Brazil, that these crusading magistrates can do their job.
Well, of course, it's interesting. It's important for democracy that not even a former president is not that could go to trial. Of course, this is important. But the problem is that you have to analyze if there are other motivations than only the corruption investigation. If they're not only, there might be also have political motivations. We have in a very, very difficult elections 2 years ago, and this polarization that we saw in the presidential election in 2014 is not over yet. So it's interesting to see what's going to come, but it's very, very difficult to know what Brazil is going to be like by the end of the year.
And we'll continue to follow. Cynthia Cardoso, I want to thank you. I want to thank Christopher Dickey, Robert Parsons, Christian Wernicke. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
And the U.S. President, Barack Obama. I saw the urgence, you know, we have our little monitor here. The White House saying that they're really good friends with Britain, that there's the special relationship is still strong. What are all these remarks about?
There's a lot of fence bending going on right now, and it's all down to an article that's been published in The Atlantic. 20,000-word article, this one. So clearly, Jeffrey Goldberg has spent a great deal of time with President Obama, and it seems that as the end of his term nears, he is getting ever more feisty, and we're seeing possibly what is the real Obama rather than the diplomat Obama. Now, one of the lines that has got the most attention includes a word that it seems the president is quite keen on, a swear word, which I won't say. We'll use the word poop instead. He said that in private he refers to Libya as the poop show, because basically, as far as he's concerned, it all went wrong. And he's placing a lot of the blame on people who were his allies at the time. And by that,
and he names names.
UK and France. Names, Nicolas Sarkozy, David Cameron. As for Nicolas Sarkozy, he says he basically had, with the Europeans in general, he thought that they would do more to follow up in Libya. He said Nicolas Sarkozy didn't because he lost the election. David Cameron soon stopped paying attention, becoming distracted by a range of other things. But it's this line that really has dealt the strongest blow to the former French president, who, of course, could be in the running again in 2017. Sarkozy wanted to trumpet the flights he was taking in the air campaign, despite the fact that we had wiped out all the air defences and essentially set up the entire infrastructure for the intervention. He even refers to the Allies as free riders at one point.
Christopher Dickey, I remember it well, because you remember there was this summit in Paris on a Saturday, I believe. Yeah. And they come out of it, and there's almost Sarkozy sort of presents the Americans with a fait accompli, with the first strikes against Libya beginning. Hillary Clinton was still on the doorstep of she was the Secretary of State at the time.
Well, I think that the French were convinced that they had to do something about what was going on in Libya, and they were pushing as much as possible the Americans to get involved, which Obama decided to do. I think his real ire is not only against Sarkozy, however, it's also against Cameron, because when he really needed Cameron's backing during the whole crisis over chemical weapons in Syria, Britain backed off and said, oh, no, we're not really going to do that. And that put him in a really untenable position. So I think he is tired of this. He's tired of being told that America needs to take all the risks and do all the leadership when others then try and take credit after America has taken the leadership.
Robert Parsons, on this, is it a fair cop that David Cameron backed off, or was it the House of Commons then? No,
I think it is a pretty fair cop. But I mean, in his favour, you do have to say that he was preoccupied with a lot of rather time-consuming important things, including a major financial crisis, which is having a pretty big effect on UK. So there were lots of really important things going on. Yeah.
The Washington Post actually has obviously been analysing this article, and they've come up with the view that it is David Cameron who is the real loser here. And just one quick look at this tweet from the US ambassador to the UK today. Our relationship is essential, it is special, true yesterday, true today, and it will be true tomorrow.
Emma, you're also following, I believe, what some are calling a bromance.
Indeed. A bromance, a romance among bros, brothers, however you want to put it. And this particular one has been given the nickname Trubama, because, of course, you're combining the names of the Canadian PM, Justin Trudeau, and Barack Obama. And if we take a look at some of the images from last night's state banquet at the White House, you can see just why people think these two really are perhaps strangely close and bordering on being a little bit of Brokeback Mountain, perhaps. And if we take a look at some of the reactions online, Trubama is my favourite thing about the internet this week, and also the only thing I'm enjoying about politics at the moment, because, of course, as we see those Republican hopefuls vying to fill his shoes, throwing insults and low blows left, right and centre, this is a refreshing, manly scent of fresh air, if you like. There is even, would you believe, some literary sort of fan literature being written about these two. BuzzFeed has been trawling through some really desperately embarrassing stuff. I will just read you a short bit of it. He reached one hand out and before he was able to hesitate, drew it slowly down Barack's cheek. His skin was warm and smooth with only the slightest touch of stubble. He wondered briefly if when it grew, it would be grey like the steely patches around his temples.
All right.
You wouldn't be able to read this out in American TV.
But we can on France 24. I want to thank you.
That sounds like 50 Shades of Grey.
Our panel. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.